The invasion fleet stretched across the void like a plague of metal locusts, their obsidian hulls drinking in the light of distant stars. Admiral Zextar of the Hegemony watched through the massive viewport of his flagship as Earth grew larger in the distance. The blue marble hung defenseless, its pathetic orbital stations already reduced to glittering debris fields that sparkled like cosmic confetti around the dying world. "Pitiful," he muttered, his forearms crossing in contempt. The humans had been given every opportunity to surrender, to accept their rightful place as subjects of the Galactic Hegemony. Instead, they had chosen defiance. They had chosen war. The bridge of the dreadnought Extinction's dawn hummed with activity as his crew prepared for the final bombardment. Communications officers monitored the last desperate transmissions from Earth's surface, while weapons specialists calibrated the planet crackers that would turn the human homeworld into another asteroid belt. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, her voice carrying the satisfaction common to all hegemony victories. "We're receiving a transmission from the Human Military Command Center. It appears to be their final surrender." Zextar's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Put it through. Let us hear their pathetic pleas for mercy." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a human male in a crisp military uniform. His face bore the weathered lines of someone who had seen too many battles, and his eyes held a peculiar quality that made Zextar's skin crawl. There was no fear there, no desperation, only a cold, calculating intelligence that seemed completely at odds with the desperate situation. "Admiral Zextar of the Hegemony Fleet," the human began, his voice steady and professional. "I am General Marcus Chen, Supreme Commander of United Earth Defense Forces. I have a message for you and your masters." Zextar leaned forward, expecting the usual terms of surrender, the bargaining for civilian lives, the desperate offers of tribute and servitude that always came when the hegemony's enemies finally realized the futility of resistance. Instead, General Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You came to our world believing you understood warfare," Chen continued. "You've conquered 17 civilizations, each one rolling over when faced with your superior numbers and technology. You expected the same from us. You expected us to see your 1,000-ship armada and simply give up." The human's image remained steady as explosions bloomed in the background behind him. Clearly, the bombardment of military installations was already underway, yet this man showed no sign of panic or urgency. "But you made a critical error in your calculations, Admiral. You failed to understand what humanity truly is. You see, every other species you've conquered had achieved peace within their own kind before they reached the stars. They had evolved beyond the need for constant warfare, beyond the brutal competition that shapes apex predators." Zextar felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the human's tone suggested this was not a surrender at all. "Humanity never had that luxury," Chen continued, his smile growing wider and somehow more terrible. "We dragged our violent nature with us to the stars. We are a species forged in the fires of 10,000 years of constant warfare. We have fought with sticks and stones, with bronze and iron, with gunpowder and nuclear fire. We have turned killing into an art form, and we have practiced that art upon ourselves for millennia." On the bridge, several of Zextar's officers shifted uncomfortably. The human's words carried an undertone of something primal and dangerous that set off every evolutionary warning system their species possessed. "You want to know the difference between humanity and every other species you've conquered?" Chen asked, leaning closer to the camera. "They were civilized. We are civilized too when it suits us. But when you threaten our homes, our families, our very existence, we remember what we really are. We remember that we are the descendants of persistence hunters who chased prey across continents until it collapsed from exhaustion. We remember that we are the children of warriors who looked at every natural disaster, every predator, every obstacle that nature threw at us, and asked not, how do we survive this, but how do we kill it? The explosions behind Chen intensified, and the camera shook slightly, but his expression never wavered. You've been monitoring our transmissions, so you know that our fleet was destroyed in the first engagement. You know that our orbital defenses lasted less than 6 hours against your advance forces. You know that our governments have fallen, our major cities are in ruins, and our military installations are being systematically eliminated. Zextar nodded slightly, confused by this recitation of obvious facts. If the human knew all this, why wasn't he surrendering? What you don't know, Chen said, and now his smile turned absolutely predatory, is that every single one of those defeats was carefully orchestrated. Every ship that died, every station that fell, every city that burned, it was all part of the plan. You see, Admiral, you made the mistake of thinking that because we're younger than other spacefaring species, we're less sophisticated in our strategic thinking. The Admiral's blood turned to ice water in his veins. Around the bridge, his officers began checking their sensors and communication arrays with sudden urgency. The truth is, we've been preparing for this day since we first detected your empire's expansion 300 years ago. We've studied every one of your conquests, analyzed every tactical doctrine you employ, mapped every supply line and communication relay in your network. We know how you fight, Admiral. We know how you think. And we've been preparing accordingly. Chen's image flickered slightly as another explosion rocked the command center, but he continued speaking as calmly as if he were discussing the weather. Right now, as I speak to you, human operatives are aboard every single ship in your glorious armada. They've been there for weeks, hidden in maintenance crawlways, disguised as repair equipment, patient as the grave. Our people have a saying, if you want to kill a king, get close to the king. Well, Admiral, we've gotten very, very close. The first explosion aboard the Hegemony fleet was small, barely visible against the massive bulk of a cruiser's engine section. But it was quickly followed by another and another. Within seconds, ships throughout the invasion force were erupting in brilliant flowers of destruction as hidden charges detonated in critical systems. You see, while you were congratulating yourself on your easy victory, Chen continued, his voice now carrying the satisfaction of a predator whose trap had finally sprung, we were filling your ships with explosives, mapping your command structures, and identifying every single weakness in your supposedly invincible war machine. Zextar watched in horror as his mighty fleet began tearing itself apart. Ships that had been pristine monuments to hegemony power were now crippled hulks, venting atmosphere and burning fuel into the void. The precision of the attacks was terrifying. Each explosion hit exactly where it would cause maximum damage while leaving the ships intact enough to potentially be salvaged later. But that's not all, Admiral, Chen said, and his expression shifted from predatory satisfaction to something far darker. You see, we learned something very important from studying your empire's history. We learned that the hegemony only respects strength, only understands power. Mercy is seen as weakness. Diplomacy is seen as cowardice. The only language you speak is violence. The background explosions were growing more intense now, and Chen had to raise his voice slightly to be heard over the din. So we're going to teach you our language, Admiral. We're going to show you what happens when you wake up a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of killing. You wanted to see how humans fight? You're about to get a masterclass. On the tactical display, Zextar could see that nearly 30% of his fleet was either destroyed or disabled. But more terrifying than the damage itself was the precision with which it had been inflicted. These weren't random acts of sabotage. They were surgical strikes carried out with an intimate knowledge of hegemony ship design and tactical doctrine. Every empire you've conquered made the same mistake, Chen continued. They tried to fight you on your terms, using your rules, respecting your conventions of warfare. We're not going to make that error. We're going to fight you the way humans have always fought our enemies, with every weapon at our disposal, using every advantage we can create, and showing absolutely no mercy to those who threaten our survival." The camera shook more violently as another massive explosion echoed through the command center. Through the smoke and debris, Chen's face remained clearly visible, his expression never wavering from that terrible, confident smile. "You came here expecting to find a civilization. Instead, you've awakened something far older and far more dangerous. You've awakened humanity's capacity for total war. And now, Admiral, you're going to learn why we conquered our own world before we ever reached for the stars." The transmission cut to static as the human command center finally succumbed to the bombardment. But the damage to the hegemony fleet continued to escalate. Ships that had survived the initial sabotage were now being targeted by something else. Sleek, predatory vessels that seemed to appear out of nowhere, striking with surgical precision before vanishing back into the void. Admiral Zexitar stared at the tactical display in growing horror as he realized the truth. The human fleet hadn't been destroyed in the first engagement. It had simply disappeared, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. And now, as his own ships burned around him, he began to understand that everything he thought he knew about human capabilities had been carefully crafted deception. The hunt had begun. And for the first time in the hegemony's long history of conquest, they were the prey. 3 days after the sabotage began, Admiral Zexitar found himself commanding a fleet that existed more in theory than in practice. Of his original 1,000 ships, fewer than 200 remained fully operational. The rest were either floating debris, crippled hulks, limping toward emergency jump points, or simply missing, vanished without a trace during what the surviving crews had begun calling the silent hours. The bridge of extinction's dawn had become a tomb of failed ambitions. Half the crew stations stood empty, their operators evacuated to emergency medical bays or, in too many cases, to the ship's morgue. The massive viewport that had once offered a commanding view of the human homeworld now showed only the wreckage of hegemony pride floating in chaotic orbits around the blue marble that still spun serenely below. "Status report," Zexitar demanded, his voice hoarse from 3 days of shouting orders into an increasingly unresponsive command structure. 67 ships report combat readiness," his tactical officer replied, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "Another 93 are operational, but have suffered significant system damage. The rest—" She gestured helplessly at the tactical display, where red icons marking destroyed vessels far outnumbered the green ones indicating functional ships. "And our pursuit of the human fleet?" The tactical officer's silence was answer enough. The mysterious vessels that had been stalking them through the outer system moved like ghosts, appearing on sensors just long enough to deliver devastating attacks before vanishing again. Every attempt to track them led to empty space and frustrated scanning crews. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We're receiving another transmission from the planet's surface." Zexitar's mandibles clicked involuntarily. The humans had been broadcasting continuously since General Chen's initial message, but none of the subsequent transmissions had been surrender offers. Instead, they had been tactical briefings, detailed analyses of hegemony ship movements, crew deployments, and strategic vulnerabilities that demonstrated an intelligence-gathering capability that should have been impossible for a supposedly defeated enemy. "Put it through," he growled, dreading what new horror the humans might reveal. The screen flickered to life, but instead of a military command center, it showed what appeared to be an ordinary human dwelling. A woman sat at a simple table, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with graying hair and the kind of unremarkable features that would make her invisible in any crowd. Only her eyes betrayed the steel beneath the mundane exterior. "Admiral Zextar," she began, her voice carrying the same unsettling confidence that had characterized General Chen's transmission. "My name is Dr. Sarah Hendricks. I'm a xenobiologist specializing in hegemony physiology and psychology. I wanted to take a moment to explain what's happening to your people." Zexatar felt his stomach drop. Xenobiologist. The humans had been studying them, learning about them, preparing for this confrontation while the hegemony had dismissed them as primitives barely worth conquering. "By now, you've noticed that your crew efficiency has dropped by approximately 40%, Dr. Hendricks continued, consulting what appeared to be a simple paper notepad. "Your reaction times are slower, your decision-making processes have become erratic, and several of your officers have begun showing signs of severe psychological stress. You probably attributed this to the shock of unexpected resistance, but I'm afraid it's rather more deliberate than that." She smiled pleasantly, as if discussing a mildly interesting research project rather than psychological warfare against an invasion fleet. "You see, Admiral, while our saboteurs were placing explosive charges throughout your ships, they were also introducing certain compounds into your life support systems. Nothing immediately dangerous, you understand. We're not barbarians. But your species has some fascinating vulnerabilities that we've spent considerable time learning to exploit." Around the bridge, Zextar could see his remaining crew members exchanging worried glances. Several of them had indeed been complaining of unusual fatigue and difficulty concentrating over the past few days. "The hegemony's greatest strength has always been your hive mind efficiency," Dr. Hendricks explained, her tone remaining conversational and almost friendly. "Your neural chemistry relies on specific pheromone cocktails to maintain optimal cognitive function and social cohesion. Disrupt those chemical signals, and your entire command structure begins to break down at a fundamental level." She turned a page in her notepad with the same casual efficiency of someone reading a recipe. "We've also introduced a mild neurotoxin derived from earth fungal spores. Again, nothing fatal, but it does interfere with the neural pathways that your species uses for rapid tactical analysis. We estimate that your strategic thinking capability has been reduced by approximately 60%. Combined with the pheromone disruption, this should make coordinated fleet actions increasingly difficult for you to execute." Zexatar realized with growing horror that she was right. Over the past few days, he had been struggling with decisions that should have been routine. His tactical instincts felt sluggish, as if he were thinking through thick fog. And looking around the bridge, he could see the same confusion and uncertainty reflected in the faces of his crew. "But the real beauty of our approach," Dr. Hendricks continued, "is that these compounds are specifically tailored to your species' biology. They won't affect any other races you might have among your crews, Nexari, Vothan, Cytherian auxiliaries, but those individuals will start to notice that their hegemony commanders are becoming increasingly erratic and unreliable. Social cohesion in a multi-species military force is such a delicate thing, don't you think?" She was right about that, too. Zextar had already received several concerning reports from auxiliary commanders, questioning orders that had seemed perfectly reasonable when he issued them, but now appeared confused or contradictory in hindsight. "Now, I imagine you're wondering how we could possibly have known so much about your physiology," Dr. Hendricks said, turning another page. "The answer is quite simple, really. We've been capturing and studying your people for centuries." The blood drained from Zextar's face as the implications hit him. "Oh yes, Admiral. Every time your expansion fleets have passed through this region of space, some of your crews have simply vanished. Missing patrol ships, disappeared survey teams, crews who never reported back from routine missions. Your command assumed they were lost to pirates or spatial anomalies. In reality, they were being very carefully collected for research purposes." She looked up from her notepad, and her pleasant expression never wavered despite the monstrous nature of what she was describing. We've had hegemony subjects in our research facilities for over 200 years, Admiral. We've mapped every aspect of your biology, psychology, and social structure. We know how you think, how you fight, what you fear, and most importantly, how to break you. Did you really think we would remain ignorant of our potential enemies while building our defenses? On the tactical display, another cluster of ships went dark as some new disaster befell them. Zextar was no longer certain whether these were attacks by the Ghost Fleet or simply system failures caused by whatever compounds the humans had introduced into their ships. But perhaps you're thinking that you can simply withdraw from Earth's system and report back to Hegemony High Command, Dr. Hendricks suggested, as if reading his mind. I'm afraid that won't be possible. You see, while we were studying your people, we were also mapping your empire's communication networks, supply lines, and command hierarchies. She turned several pages at once, revealing what appeared to be detailed diagrams of hegemony fleet formations. Right now, human strike teams are moving against every major hegemony installation within 50 light-years of Earth. Your supply depots are being destroyed, your communication relays are going silent, and your reinforcement fleets are discovering that their supposedly secure bases have been compromised by enemies who know their security codes, their patrol schedules, and the exact location of their ammunition stores. The scope of what she was describing was impossible. It would have required planning and preparation on a scale that defied belief, along with intelligence-gathering operations that spanned centuries. We call it the Terran Doctrine, Admiral. Total preparation followed by total warfare. When humanity decides that something needs to be destroyed, we don't simply attack it. We study it. We learn it. We understand it so completely that we can dismantle it from within, and then we do exactly that. Dr. Hendricks closed her notepad and folded her hands again, her expression returning to that pleasant, grandmotherly demeanor that was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. Your empire has existed for 3,000 years, Admiral. It has conquered 17 civilizations and enslaved billions of beings. But it was built on a foundation of overwhelming technological superiority and strategic surprise. What happens to such an empire when it faces an enemy that has superior intelligence, better planning, and 3 centuries of preparation time? She smiled again, and this time there was nothing pleasant about the expression. You're about to find out, because humanity doesn't just want to defeat the hegemony, Admiral. We want to erase it. We want to make it a cautionary tale that other species will tell their children for the next 1,000 years. We want your empire to become a lesson about what happens when you threaten Earth. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of Extinction's dawn in stunned silence. Around them, the wreckage of the hegemony's greatest fleet continued its slow dance around a world that refused to die. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, human ships continued their patient, methodical work of turning the galaxy's greatest military power into a memory. Admiral Zexatar stared at the tactical display and realized that General Chen had been right. They had come expecting to fight a civilization. Instead, they had awakened something far older and infinitely more dangerous. They had awakened humanity's talent for making war, and now they were going to learn exactly why no enemy of Earth had ever survived the experience. 6 months after the first sabotage operations began, the Galactic Hegemony ceased to exist as a meaningful political entity. The news reached Earth through carefully monitored hegemony communication networks that had been compromised so thoroughly that human intelligence operatives often knew about hegemony military orders before the intended recipients did. Admiral Zextar sat in what had once been his command chair aboard Extinction's Dawn. But the ship that surrounded him bore little resemblance to the mighty dreadnought that had approached Earth at the head of a 1,000-ship armada. The bridge was dark except for a few emergency lighting strips. Most of the crew stations had been abandoned or repurposed. and the massive viewport now looked out onto a salvage operation run by humans who treated the former flagship of the hegemony fleet as just another piece of space debris to be processed. The admiral himself was no longer really an admiral. The hegemony command structure had collapsed completely 3 weeks ago when the humans simultaneously attacked every major military installation, government center, and communication hub across 17 star systems. The speed and coordination of the offensive had been beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human strike forces had appeared at targets thousands of light-years apart at exactly the same moment, as if they had been planning and positioning for this operation for decades. Which, as it turned out, they had been. "Admiral Zextar," a familiar voice called out, and he turned to see General Marcus Chen walking onto the bridge. The human military commander looked exactly as he had in that first transmission 6 months ago, though he now wore the insignia of the newly formed Terran Expeditionary Command. "I hope you don't mind the informal visit, but I wanted to speak with you personally before we conclude our business here." Zextar studied the human with what remained of his tactical awareness. Chen moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who knew he held all the advantages, but there was no cruelty in his demeanor, no gloating satisfaction at his enemy's defeat. If anything, he seemed almost regretful about the necessity of what had occurred. "Your business," Zextar croaked, his voice hoarse from weeks of shouting feudal orders. "You mean the complete destruction of everything my people built over 3 millennia. "Not destruction," Chen corrected, settling into one of the undamaged chairs. "Transformation. The hegemony as a military and political entity needed to be eliminated. That was never in question after you chose to attack Earth. But the billions of beings who lived under hegemony rule deserve better than to simply be abandoned in the chaos of imperial collapse." He gestured toward the viewport, where human ships were conducting what appeared to be massive humanitarian operations alongside their salvage work. Right now, Terran aid convoys are delivering food, medical supplies, and infrastructure support to every former hegemony world. We're establishing new communication networks, trade agreements, and defense partnerships with any species that wants them. The goal isn't to replace the hegemony's empire with our own. It's to help these civilizations build something better than what they had before. Zextar found this almost harder to believe than the swift military defeat itself. The hegemony had been built on the principle that strength meant dominance, that victory meant subjugation. The idea that humans would expend enormous resources helping their former enemies made no sense according to any strategic doctrine he understood. "Why?" he asked finally. "You have proven your military superiority beyond any doubt. You could rule the galaxy if you chose to. Why waste your strength on charity?" Chen smiled, but it was a different expression than the predatory grin he had worn during that first transmission. This one carried genuine warmth, tinged with something that might have been sadness. "Because that's not who we are, Admiral. Yes, humans are exceptional at warfare. 300,000 years of evolution saw to that. But we're also exceptional at building, at healing, at turning enemies into allies. Do you know what our greatest military victory was, Admiral? It wasn't a battle or a campaign. It was convincing our own species to stop fighting each other and start working together." The human stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the orbital restoration work that was already transforming Earth's space from a debris field into a bustling center of interstellar commerce. "We spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other, and then we spent another 1,000 years learning to channel that competitive instinct into something constructive. The same drive that made us apex predators also made us builders of civilizations. The same intelligence that let us devise new ways to wage war also let us devise new ways to make peace." Chen turned back to face the Admiral, and his expression had grown more serious. "The hegemony made the mistake of thinking that because we were young we were naive. The truth is quite the opposite. We understand exactly how dangerous we are, which is why we work so hard to be something better than what our instincts tell us to be. We know that the galaxy is safer when species work together rather than trying to dominate each other. A new transmission alert chimed softly through the bridge speakers, and Chen glanced at a small communication device on his wrist. Ah, perfect timing. Admiral, I'd like you to hear something that I think will interest you. The main screen activated, showing a massive assembly hall filled with representatives from dozens of different species. At the center of the hall, a familiar figure was speaking to the gathered delegates, Dr. Sarah Hendricks, though she now wore formal diplomatic attire rather than the casual clothing she had worn during her psychological warfare broadcasts. The Terran Federation formally proposes the establishment of the Galactic Cooperative Council, she was saying, her voice carrying easily across the assembly hall. This body would serve as a forum for peaceful resolution of interspecies disputes, coordination of mutual defense agreements, and facilitation of trade and cultural exchange between member civilizations. The camera panned across the assembly, showing delegations from species that had been subjects of the hegemony, others that had fought against it, and still others that had never encountered either humanity or the fallen empire. All were listening with obvious interest to the human proposals. Membership in the council would be entirely voluntary, Dr. Hendricks continued. No species would be compelled to join, and any member would be free to withdraw at any time. The fundamental principle of the Council is that no civilization has the right to impose its will upon another, regardless of technological or military advantages. Zextar watched in amazement as the delegates began responding positively to the human proposals. Species that had been bitter enemies under the hegemony's rule were openly discussing cooperation agreements. Former hegemony client species were enthusiastically embracing the idea of genuine independence, coupled with voluntary mutual defense pacts. Impossible, he whispered. 17 different species will never agree to work together as equals. There must be hierarchies. There must be dominance relationships. There must be... Must there? Chen asked quietly. Admiral, your people spent 3,000 years proving that galactic civilization could be maintained through force and subjugation. We're going to spend the next 3,000 years proving that it works better through cooperation and mutual respect. The transmission showed a formal vote taking place in the assembly hall. Species after species cast their votes in favor of the proposed Galactic Cooperative Council. Even former hegemony military officers, beings who had been trained from birth to see warfare as the ultimate arbiter of disputes, were supporting the human initiative. This is what you don't understand about humanity, Admiral, Chen said as the vote concluded with overwhelming support for the new galactic government. We didn't defeat the hegemony because we're better at war than you are, though we demonstrably are. We defeated you because we're better at peace. We know how to turn enemies into friends, how to transform fear into trust, how to build something greater than the sum of its parts. The screen shifted to show construction projects on dozens of worlds, human engineers working alongside former hegemony subjects to build schools, hospitals, communication networks, and transportation infrastructure. The contrast with the old empire's exploitative approach to subject worlds was stark and deliberate. Every species you conquered, you kept as subjects, Chen continued. Every world you controlled, you drained for resources. Every victory you won, you used to justify the next conquest. You built an empire based on fear and maintained it through violence. And the moment you encountered serious resistance, the entire structure collapsed because it had no foundation, except force. Zextar realized with dawning understanding that this had been the humans' plan from the very beginning. The military defeat of the hegemony had been only the first phase of a much larger operation, one designed not just to destroy an enemy, but to replace it with something fundamentally better. You never intended to simply drive us away from Earth, he said slowly. You were planning to restructure the entire galaxy. Of course we were, Chen replied matter-of-factly. Admiral, did you really think we would go to all the trouble of defeating the hegemony just to let the same power structures and conflicts emerge again in a few decades? We're not interested in temporary victories. When humanity commits to solving a problem, we solve it permanently. He gestured again toward the viewport, where the last of the hegemony fleet was being processed by human salvage operations. But instead of simply stripping the ships for raw materials, the humans were carefully refurbishing them to serve as the core of a new interspecies peacekeeping force, one that would operate under the authority of the Galactic Cooperative Council rather than any single empire. Your ships will fly again, Admiral, but instead of carrying weapons of conquest, they'll carry aid supplies, diplomatic missions, and joint peacekeeping forces made up of volunteers from every member species of the Council. Instead of spreading fear across the galaxy, they'll be helping to build the future we all want to live in. For the first time since the human campaign began, Zextar felt something other than despair or confusion. Looking at the images of former enemies working together, of species that had been at war for centuries now planning joint exploration missions, of children from a dozen different worlds learning together in integrated schools, he began to understand what the humans had really accomplished. They hadn't just won a war, they had won a peace that might actually last. What happens to me now? He asked finally. Chen's expression softened slightly. That's up to you, Admiral. The new council has established truth and reconciliation committees to address crimes committed under the hegemony's rule. You can face trial for your role in the attempted genocide of humanity, or you can choose to help us build something better. We could use experienced fleet commanders for the peacekeeping forces, people who understand both the old ways and the new realities. Zextar stared out at the bustling orbital infrastructure that was already transforming Earth's space into a hub of galactic civilization. 6 months ago, he had come here intending to exterminate humanity and add their world to the hegemony's collection of subjects. Now that same world was becoming the center of a new kind of galactic government, one that offered hope instead of fear, cooperation instead of domination, and a future that included everyone instead of just the strongest. You were right, he said finally. In that first transmission, General Chen told me that we would learn how humans fight. I thought he meant we would learn about your weapons and tactics, but that wasn't what he meant at all. No, Chen agreed quietly. He meant you would learn that when humanity fights, we don't just fight to win. We fight to build something better than what came before. And once you understand that, Admiral, everything else starts to make sense. As the Admiral considered his options, another group of human ships arrived in Earth orbit. These weren't warships or construction vessels, but passenger transports carrying the first waves of interspecies exchange, students, diplomats, artists, and scientists. The galaxy was already changing, already becoming something new and unprecedented. Humanity had kept its promise. They had shown the galaxy how humans fight, not just with weapons and tactics, but with vision and hope, and an unshakable belief that former enemies could become future friends. And in doing so, they had given the galaxy something it had never had before, a genuine chance at lasting peace.